The Rule of Two was an absolutely revolutionary time for the Sith, as it was the complete revitalization of the entire way the Sith operated and what they believed. Bane's lineage would set the course of every function of the Sith Order, even after the death of Sidious. Ironically though, we actually know very little about the era between Bane and its culmination in Darth Sidious. The lore of both Star Wars Legends and canon usually puts more emphasis on the bookend, beginning, and end of the Rule of Two rather than fill in anything about the middle. We're most familiar with Plagueis' era of things due to the Darth Plagueis novel, and will probably get the lineage prior to him once the Acolyte show releases. Besides that though, most every story that we know of about the middle era of the Rule of Two comes from secondhand sources, and therefore leaves out a lot of information. The one thing though that we don't immediately know is how exactly the Rule of Two managed to avoid detection by the Jedi for decades, nay, centuries. And adding on to this, how did the Jedi Council and the Phantom Menace actually know of the Rule of Two, as we see Mace Windu discussing it with Yoda during Qui-Gon's funeral, as they were trying to decipher whether Maul was the Master or the Apprentice Sith? Well, we might have the answer for you in the form of some small bits of information, along with some theories and speculation. So come along with us today, my friends and acolytes, as we open up another holocron and figure out how the Rule of Two Sith managed to stay hidden for so long. The first question to counteract our point is, well, with only two Sith Lords at the time in the entire galaxy full of trillions of beings, wouldn't it be an easy option to hide? To this we say, not as well as you may think. Bane's original idea for the Rule of Two employed this assumption, but even Bane made sure to cover his tracks and operate through a complicated and ever-changing network of spies and proxies in order to cover his tracks completely. You see, it was probably easier for the earlier members of the Rule of Two to hide due to the time frame that they lived in. Once the War of Light and Darkness ended after the 7th Battle of Ruusan, the Jedi were basically all in complete denial of the existence of any Sith whatsoever. They were so ready to move on and be done with the warring that they were prepared to willingly turn a blind eye to any dark side activity, opting not to follow leads or rumors of surviving Sith Lords as to keep the peace. This would be during the time of Darth Zana, Cognis, and Millennial, so in a sense, these Sith basically had carte blanche of whatever they wanted to go along and do, as so long as they kept their activity low and incognito. This era, though, would not last long, as the Jedi again began to take a more proactive stance against the dark side that they believed still remained, which summarizes our point in 2 words: Jedi Shadows. Acolytes watching this holocron will likely be familiar with the famous Shadows, but for those of you who aren't, we highly recommend you check out our other holocrons about them and the Jedi Sentinels as a whole. But to put it simply, the Jedi Shadows were a very small but elite task force of Jedi Knights which specialized in hunting down and destroying all remnants of the dark side of the Force. This included the reconnaissance or destruction of dark side artifacts and the arrest, or more often assassination, of dark side wielding foes. Anybody found with ancient or more modern Sith knowledge would immediately be placed in the Jedi's jurisdiction, where they would then be extensively searched, interrogated, and incarcerated for years, if not decades. This light side inquisition was an ongoing affair throughout many decades and even centuries of the galaxy, but had a certain boom during 900 to 500 BBY, the period in time right in between the ending of the Old Republic and the beginning of the High Republic era. This is an era that hardly ever gets talked about, mostly because nothing of interest really occurs besides the Jedi Order being reorganized by Master Fey Coven. It was during the time of Fey Coven that there was a lockdown on many darkside artifacts and locations than almost any other point in galactic history. The Jedi of this era wanted to ensure that the Sith would never return. Unlike the era of the Clone War, the Sith were still a very real reality. This caused the Rule of Two Sith to remain extremely vigilant. They couldn't simply fight the Jedi, as too many Jedi Knights suddenly disappearing would draw much unwanted attention. So basically, the Sith at this point were on the run and having to stick to the shadows. It would be at this point that we know of men like Darth Gravid, who would set up strongholds on worlds deep within the Outer Rim, as well as the unknown regions. Sith of this era avoided being too close to the mid-rim, or core, and did most of their dealings in Hutt-bled space. Soon enough, likely after Darth Gene, the Sith would eschew the use of fortresses and establish hiding places altogether, and instead began to fully meld themselves within the galactic populace, hiding in plain sight. This would mean that the Sith would start to learn more and lean more into double lives, and having their Sith identity as their alter ego. Many wise Dark Lords would continue to have most of their bidding done behind the scenes through a network of well-paid proxies and informants, while also keeping a book of trusty bounty hunters. The Jedi do not venture to Hutt space all that often, as it is extremely dangerous. But also during this time, something in the Sith's favor turned, as the Jedi began bending the knee to the Republic Senate. Due to certain newfound laws and liabilities, Jedi didn't have as much sway when it came to the criminal underworld of Hutt-led space. This allowed clear waters for the Sith to slither around and get their business completed, but even then, they kept their Sith identities secret. Nobody could be trusted. Should a Hutt or a crime lord learn of their identity, they could use it as leverage. At the time, this was an even greater threat to the Sith than the Jedi were. But with this risk, the Sith would soon hit a stroke of brilliance and decided to add an extra layer of protection to their identities. Protection in the form of Dark Jedi. When the Jedi shadows were sniffing out the dark side like bloodhounds, the Sith would naturally need to throw them off the trail. This is where the Dark Jedi got involved. Sith would pay, or more often, offer the Dark Jedi power and wisdom if they would simply instigate behind the scenes and expose themselves to the Jedi. Then the Dark Jedi would go forward on a plan of destruction or some other distraction. The Jedi who once sensed the Sith would then go after to take care of the Dark Jedi, thinking that the dark side they had sensed earlier was nothing but a Dark Jedi and no Sith. The Sith were gone. This was the idea and the reality that was smashed into the Jedi brains by the Dark Jedi. This plan on behalf of the Sith, though, would end up backfiring, as the Jedi Order actually learned the secret of the Rule of Two from one of these Dark Jedi. A fallen Jedi by the name of Kif Jean would end up beginning his own dark side practices in an ancient Sith fortress constructed by the Sith Darth Revan. There, he would find manuscripts and knowledge that revealed the truth of the Rule of Two and its origins. The Jedi Knights would then hunt down Jean and stop him during his destructive dark side ritual that he was attempting to create. In Jean's last words, he gave the Jedi the warning about the return of the Sith and the Rule of Two. At first, the Jedi thought he was a raving madman. Interestingly though, the Jedi knew of the Rule of Two for this reason, but also know they would be far too difficult to find and locate the Sith by normal means. And here the Jedi made another mistake. They decided to wait. They allowed rumors to persist and to continue further diluting the idea of the Sith's existence into myth, as at this point, they still thought the Rule of Two was a rumor. That is, until Qui-Gon Jinn would return from Tatooine, return with a very troubling tale about his duel with a warrior wielding a red blade who was well trained in the Jedi arts. At this moment, the galaxy was changed forever, and the Jedi Council concluded that the Rule of Two had in fact been more than a simple bedtime story, and was now their grim reality. But anyway, my friends and acolytes, did you pretty much guess how the Rule of Two stayed hidden for this long? And how Yoda actually knew of the Rule of Two's existence? Anyway, my friends, thank you so much for stopping by our archives. May the Force be with you always, and have a great day.